Why is that so different? Hi, this is Anna, Imagination with a Healing Garden, and welcome to the Philosophical Coffee. If you are new to my work, I am a philosopher, psychologist, sociologist of 30 years, and I am a cartographer of the internal expanse. I do work in something I refer to as the AI DNS, which is the abstract intradimensional navigational system. Really fucking cool shit. And basically, if I were to put that into common perspective, it means the world is bigger than we think it is. There's a whole abstract world that lives parallel to the material plane that a lot of people in the material plane deny its existence. And yet we use things like math, time, and money, which come from the abstract world, as well as imagination, make-believe, and play, fiction, writing, stories. All are part of the abstract world. And we have an unspoken rule law of the abstract, which says, do not cross this line. And if you do, you're going to be called insane. Insane means no logic. It means lack of logic or illogical. And as a result, when something becomes illogical because it is not measured by logic or it lacks known defined logic, we immediately deem somebody as being insane. So I, having no problems being called insane, began mapping the undefined abstract world and organizing it because that's where I lived for 32 years when I was a multiple. And when I started to build and put together all of the components of the abstract world, what I learned and realized was that it's quite measurable with logic, which is why we have math and physics and philosophy. And using the rules of the abstract, the measurable, the defined measurements of the abstract, I was able to start mapping it out and defining it. And when I did that, I was able to find my way around the abstract and put my brain back together again, specifically my mind. And that's what I did. When I did that, I found logical health, which is the core to all mental illness. When you have cognitive dissonance, when you have discord or a lack of logic in your comprehension, it leads to discord, which leads to cognitive dissonance, which leads to invasive perspective, which leads to mental illness. So using the AI DNS, you can put your brain back together again. It's really fucking cool shit. Anyway, I am talking this morning on empathy, real empathy versus fake empathy. 99% of empaths have fake empathy. When I hear someone go, oh, I'm an empath. Oh, honey, no, you're not. You have PTSD and you've internalized the suffering of others because the suffering of others is very much an emotional trigger that reminds us of our own past suffering. Real empathy is different. Real empathy is called compassionate foresight. And real empathy is the absence of emotions. Wait for it. Don't jump to conclusions. Real empathy is foresight, so that there is no emotion while you sit there and process the question, if I open my mouth and I'm insensitive to this individual, how are they going to feel? I'm going to really emphasize time. I'm going to really emphasize time. Just a moment. I have to have my music because I'm a neurodivergent and I say so. I have to have my music. So time is basically consisting of two particular points. You need three, actually. It's coordinates. You need 3 points in order to define location. You need a point of origin. You need... Why am I doing this again? Why am I writing? Hold on a minute. Let me get up my blackboard. I put everything on a blackboard. Oh, cancel. Just give me a moment here. There we go. So today's blackboard is going to be on empathy and compassionate foresight. I can spell. Empathy and compassionate foresight versus emotional triggers. All right, let me go ahead and hit publish. And then I'm going to get you guys the link and drop it in below. That way you can follow along with my... I love everything about this right now. Give me a minute here. So if you look on the link below, I have something I refer to as a blackboard. And today's blackboard. There you go. This is basically where I keep all my notes, my PDFs, everything. So as I talk, you can follow along and I will hit update periodically. So it is basically compassionate foresight versus the internalization of emotional suffering. So how this works is basically comparing the difference between the two. And this is really, really vital to understanding the difference between empathy and the internalization of emotional suffering. So let me go ahead and walk you through what's really going on here. Internalization of emotional suffering is actually PTSD. So there is basically a type of PTSD that is unacknowledged. And PTSD is when you see a catalyst, and this is vital, is the catalyst for the emotional internalization. The catalyst for is what defines PTSD. But empathy is I just said the word, and it was a beautiful word, and I'm trying to remember what it was. Compassionate foresight is definitely it, but there was something else I had just said, and it was perfect. Empathy is it's void of emotion because you are thinking about the consequences. It's literally there's a time gap. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, let's do this mathematically. I can do this mathematically. So I want you to imagine that there is a line, okay? Beep. Yeah, this is how it needs to be done. There is a line here, okay? There you go. All right. And let me go ahead and update. I'm going to go ahead and hit update so you can take a look at the blackboard. So you have a line, A, B, and C. Now, we're going to go ahead and we are going to have two examples. The first one is in the case of PTSD, which is often mistaken as empathy. We're going to call this false empathy. And then you have true empathy, which is going to be the example 2. So example 1, and when I'm done here, I'm going to hit update so you can follow along. Example 2 is going to be true empathy. And example 1 is going to be PTSD false empathy. All right, so this is how this works. Basically, in the case of PTSD false empathy, you have the emotional catalyst, which is A. And then you have the trigger, B, response. And then you have the nurturing urge to resolve their pain. And this is actually an emotional prosthetic in disguise because you are projecting your own suffering onto them. Now, in the case of true empathy, there is no catalyst. There is no emotional catalyst. You are getting ready to open your mouth. In A, you are pausing to reflect on Good God, I wish I could remember. It was such a phenomenal word, and I said it, and I don't remember what I said. You are pausing to reflect on how your words will affect others. And then B is having the strategy. It's literally compassionate foresight with strategy to determine how your words will affect others. And then it's without an emotional catalyst, it is the priority. It is the priority of protecting the feelings of the other individual. And there it is. It is without an emotional catalyst, it's the priority of protecting the feelings of the other individual so that you watch what you say. It is literally a prevention. Empathy is a prevention of pain for another. And that's really it. It is the prevention of causing harm to another. It is the prevention. And I cannot emphasize that enough. It is the prevention. Whereas people think that, oh, I'm empathetic, therefore I feel your emotions. I'm an empath. And that's not it at all. Here, let me go ahead and hit update so you can see. Because what you are doing is basically putting the cart before the horse. And what you're really doing is using, this is very true, you are using the suffering of other people. You are internalizing. That's it right there. You are internalizing the suffering of others. That is not empathy. Not at all. When we say you need to be more empathetic, what we're actually talking about is you need to think about how your words affect others. How your words affect others. Think before you speak. Remember how we heard this as a child? Think before you speak. That was referring to empathy. And over the last 10 years, there is this spiritual glorification, spiritual glorification of PTSD. Ooh, ouch, that hurt, right? It is a spiritual glorification of PTSD. Oh, that's going to hurt a lot of people, but oh well. Okay, see, that's not empathetic. Yeah, I'm all about truth, and this is one of my problems. Is I'm all about truth first. I don't I don't help people lie to themselves because, and this is how my brain works. Is I'm going delusion hurts people in the long run, really, and that's it. Delusion. And let me go ahead and do a third example here because this is where my brain is. Yeah, this is where my brain is. So yeah, I'm starting to see. Let's go Anna's philosophy. So I'm going to do another example here called Anna's philosophy. And I can see the psychological consequence, the psychological long-term damage, long-term harm. There you go. I can see the psychological long-term harm that an individual suffers due to self-delusion. So when I speak, I think truth provides long-term mental health. Whereas also at A is delusion and self-lies provides long-term damage to mental health. So my immediate is, yeah, I don't help people lie to themselves. And that is my core belief. I don't help people lie to themselves. I will not play the delusion game. I don't. I do not play the delusion game. I cannot. I am incompatible with the delusion game. Compatible with the delusion game. And I can't. And I just I can't. I can't do it. It's and I also know that some people are absolutely symbiotic, compatible with the delusion game, and some people are absolutely symbiotic to their lives. So here's another. I know that some people are symbiotic to their lives. So yeah, boy, do I know that, which is why I'm saying I am not for everybody. If you are attached to your lies to the point where you are symbiotic to them, go away, please. This is not your space, because I cannot. To feed your delusion would be to harm me, and to lie to you would be to harm you. But to tell you the truth would also be to harm those people. So they really should not be in the space. We are incompatible. So it's either if you, and this is very, very true, the people in my circle are not permitted to lie to themselves, because in order for this is where we have a catch-22, where I would then have to choose between self-harm or harm to others. And I can't do both. I cannot do either. So when I see somebody lying to themselves, my immediate thought is, oh, tell the truth. And I'm going to tell you the truth. But people can't handle the truth, which means they really should not be in the space. This is the space for self-honest people. If you want the self-honesty, okay, but you're going to hear some shit that you're not going to like, because there's a lot of delusion out there. So that being said, I am incompatible with delusion. I am absolutely, yeah, that is an Anna truth. Yeah, Anna is incompatible. Anna is incompatible with delusion. I can't. It causes me harm. And if telling the truth is something that causes you more harm, if you are symbiotic to your delusions, this is not a good space for you. You need to leave. I love you, but you need to leave. So that being said, there is a spiritual glorification of PTSD with people who call themselves empaths. Oh, well, I'm an empath. No, you are not an empath. What you are is somebody who has significant PTSD, so that when you see the suffering of others, you internalize it. And that is, in fact, precisely what PTSD. It is the internalization. And PTSD has depths to it, a lot of depth to it that people are not exploring, that people are not aware of. So let's look deeper into what PTSD actually is. PTSD is, let me go ahead and update the page so you get the updated Blackboard notes. Click. So we're going to break down PTSD on another level. Now, there is the superficial definition, which is the flashbacks. Yeah, we're going to tear apart PTSD today. There are the flashbacks. And what the flashbacks look like is you have a common object. The common object. There you go. So there's the common object trigger. And that is right there. Okay, and then there's the trigger itself, which they call them flashbacks. Oh, I really don't like to use the word flashbacks. Sometimes it's flashbacks. That's one of the consequences. So we're going to go back to this grid, the ABC grid. And with the ABC grid, we have A is the catalyst. B is the catalyst. So A is the catalyst. B is the reaction time. I would say response. And then C is the reaction time. So those are the three qualifications of PTSD. There's a catalyst, there's a response, and there's a reaction time. And I do mean a really short reaction time, like a short reaction time. So with the catalyst, it could be a common object. And this is what a lot of people don't know. Not PTSD, and this is really important. It is how do I put this? abusive object. So superficial is a common, and it's emphasis on common object trigger. So a common object trigger would be a checkerboard, would be fireworks, would be dog barking. These are real triggers that two of them I had to overcome. One was the checkerboard. So these are common objects. And if you are getting triggered by common everyday objects, that's PTSD because it inhibits your ability to interact with common objects. And that is huge, is it inhibits your daily life. So a checkerboard, this is an example a former friend of mine had where when she was like 7, she watched her father beat her mother. And there was blood that fell on the tiled floor, which was a black and white checkered floor. And to this day, if she sees even a checkerboard, that black and white pattern, it triggers her. The checkerboard, and this is what's going on inside of the subconscious mind, is it's trauma by association. That is what it really is. It is trauma by association. So that the subconscious mind links, creates a blank link to a common object. Oh, there you go. A danger link. There you go. That's a great way of putting it. The subconscious mind creates a danger link to an ordinary object. And that's PTSD. Boom. That's it right there. The subconscious mind creates a danger link to an ordinary object, a danger and a fear link. It's really, that's it right there. And it's fear conditioning. It is a type of fear conditioning. That is actually what's going on. And this is where the subconscious mind is really stupid, is because it associates danger with a common object. And that's where checkerboards are examples of this. A dog barking, examples. And fireworks especially. A car backfiring. Oh, that's such a horrible sound for me for a long time. A car backfiring. That's another common object where there's actually no danger, but the danger is associated. It's trauma by association. That's what I love to call it, is trauma by association. And that is PTSD. So now if we break it down, and this is what happens when you have the common object trigger. Now, the other type of PTSD is the emotions. And this is something else. This is something else entirely. So everyone knows, or everyone thinks for the most part, that PTSD is only, oh, well, it's an ordinary object, or it's an object. No, there's another one here. There is an emotional trigger. And the emotional trigger, The emotional trigger is crying. There you go. This one's going to hit hard with a lot of people. Crying. Children crying. Very common. Babies crying. Yep, crying is part of it, which is why a lot of people are like, don't cry. It's because crying is the trigger. Sadness is the trigger. Fear is the trigger. And emotional suffering is the trigger. Loneliness is the trigger. Abandonment. So these are all the emotions. Rejection. These are the emotional triggers. So when you see people in these situations, it's an immediate link of, oh my God, they're suffering. And we're experiencing in that brief moment an immediate connection to their suffering through the emotional trigger. But people are not aware that PTSD also comes with an emotional trigger. So you have your ordinary object trigger, which everybody knows about. Sound is common. You have object, and I really want to change this over so that there's also sound. And that's really it, to a sound. So there's the ordinary object. So here you go. So it's a visual. There you go. Let's sort this out a little bit further. So you have an ordinary object, a visual. You have visual triggers. A checkerboard would be a visual object. For me, I'm going to put here dead frogs. Animal abuse. This is one I'm never going to get over. Animal abuse. And then there's circumstantial. There's also circumstantial. Circumstantial is when you see a scenario, and the scenario is what is linked to the trauma. So animal abuse is a scenario. That is very much a scenario of PTSD. So I'm going to go ahead, update again. So if you want to refresh the page, you can. So with PTSD, you have visual. You have visual ordinary objects that trigger the PTSD. You have circumstantial situations that trigger the PTSD, like animal abuse or a neglected child. Lots of people have this one. Neglected children. Oh my God, is that one common? We have non-consensual situations. Freedom. Yep, that's where mine is. You have non-consensual situations. Those are circumstantial, which is why people get angry and aggressive and they interfere with, hey, you need to back off. It's because they are being triggered by the circumstantial. Let me see here. By the circumstantial trigger. And then you've got the sound, which is fireworks, a dog barking, a car backfiring. But you also have emotional triggers. And this is where empathy comes in. So your subconscious mind creates danger, fear linked to an emotional trigger. So crying, children crying, babies crying, sadness, fear, emotional suffering, loneliness, abandonment, rejection. And what happens in that time period is that people, and let's go back to our graph here. Let's grab the ABC graph. So what's going on in the case of the emotional trigger is people are seeing the emotional suffering of others. They feel or sense the emotional suffering of others. And then they immediately try to save. Actually, it's an impulse or an urge to save or stop the suffering because you're in the middle of a PTSD episode. That is actually what's going on. But people go, oh, I'm an empath. And we're back to the glorification, the spiritual glorification of PTSD. And that is exactly what's going on. Is the spiritual, I'm going to say that so many times. It's so perfectly said. Like that's it right there. It is spiritual glorification of PTSD. And instead of dealing with your emotional trigger, you are spiritually glorifying the PTSD. Real empathy is completely void of emotion. And it is the ability to think before you talk. And it is the taking ownership, taking accountability. Here you go. Real empathy is taking accountability for how your words and actions affect others. That is empathy. Compassionate foresight. Before you cause emotional harm to others. That is empathy. And this is where a lot of people really, they don't understand this. And they're so busy doing spiritual glorification of their PTSD, not realizing that what they're dealing with is PTSD, that it's not triggering. I unfortunately have significant history in, I have significant history in torture, unfortunately, animal torture and myself torture. So when I watch TV to this day, well, this is where it gets different. I would watch a movie. For some reason, our television in America is really heavy on showing torture. I don't know why. I think it's because the majority of people don't experience torture, so they just throw it out there like it's nothing, and I don't understand it. And I do mean most of our television shows torture, and I'm going, what the fuck is wrong with our TV? And and all I can tell you really over and over again is most people have no fucking clue. So yeah, I had to filter a lot of TV. Every time torture came on, I would experience a PTSD episode. Now, and this is how I discovered this, is I went through the stage where I glorified my empathy, my PTSD, and I said, "Oh, I'm an empath, I can feel it." And it took me a long time to realize, oh, I wasn't feeling it. It was a memory. It was an emotional memory of my own torture and the torturing that I witnessed firsthand of animals. And it was a flashback, but it wasn't a visual imagery flashback. It was an emotional flashback. And it happened so quickly that it catapulted me back into the memory, the emotional memory. And I can't. Now, it was about a week ago. After I'd broken this down, I broke this down about a month ago. And it was about a week ago, I was watching TV and I watched somebody being tortured. Stranger Things. I was watching Stranger Things and they were being tortured in it. And my daughter was like, "Mom, are you all right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm perfectly fine." I was no longer internalizing the emotional memory. I was no longer internalizing their emotional suffering and projecting my own story onto them. There was a disconnect, finally. And I wanted to sit down and dissect what happened, that there was finally, suddenly, a disconnect between my being here while they're over there, they're suffering, quote unquote, and being tortured in the show, but I wasn't. And it was objectivity. It was being objective. And that's it. You have your objectiveness and you have your internalization and your projection. Objectiveness is a whole nother creature. We talk about boundaries, and that's just, and I've spoken about this before, and we confuse boundaries and we confuse empathy. And this is all getting muddled together. And this is where it's like we really need to stop muddling it because it's preventing our healing. We really need to stop muddling this because it's preventing our healing. That boundaries is actually the placement of first person point of view. This is where dimensions and point of view really start to interfere with how we do things. When we experience, how do I explain this? I got to think about this because this is really it. You have your boundaries and you have false empathy. Well, I'm going to call PTSD empathy. Maybe empathetic PTSD. That might be good. Empathetic PTSD. And then you have objectivity, being objective, the state of being objective. Let me break down what's really going on here. The state of being objective. Internalizing. And I call this identity displacement. That is really what I call this. But let me go ahead and translate this over into the common perspective for you. So it is the internalization, is the placement of the self. I want to say the misplaced misplaced placement. Let's say the incorrect placement of the self. And I'm going to be breaking this down, so just give me a minute while I fumble around with the words. Projection is lashing out. Projection is lashing out. That is the mirroring. That is when we have the law of reflection that's been conflicted. Law of reflection has been compromised by trauma. It is actually, let's break this down even further. It is the aggressive defense in an attempt to protect the self, but is doing so poorly. Yeah, it's doing so, It is protecting the self from the internalized pain. Boom, there it is. It is protecting the self from internalized pain, internalized displaced pain. Projection is the aggressive defense in an attempt to protect the self, protecting the self from the internalized displaced pain within the self. Again, it's emotional PTSD, where you see someone's story or emotions and the emotional memory is relived. Wow. So I'm trying to take now internalization. When you take internalization, oh, I'm breaking this down. I got to figure this out. It's right there at the tip of my tongue. Internalization. It's at the tip of my brain. Internalization. What happens in the point of there is a point of shift with internalizing and objectiveness. And I felt it when something in me clicked, and now I'm objective. Now I'm objective, and it has nothing to do with boundaries. It has nothing to do with boundaries. It has to do with something else. We are told, oh, it's boundaries. Boundaries will get you to objectiveness. They will. No, they won't. No, they won't. There's confusion going on. And it's so poorly defined and clarified that there's confusion. Boundaries do not get you to a state of objectiveness. They don't. They help. They keep you protected. Boundaries replace the need for projection. What is it? Oh, it's right there. And I'm going to have a breakthrough here in a minute. I just got to find it out. So I'm doing some exploratory dialogue this morning while I fish around to figure this out until I find the logic, because there's something there. Internalization is the incorrect placement of the self. It is very much self or identity displacement. I could feel that, but why? And what is the difference between being objective? How do you get to being objective? This is what I really want to know. How do you become objective? And it's something to do with first person point of view. What is going on? I would say that it's unchecked compassion. Unchecked compassion. Over relating to someone. What is it? And empathy is the door. Empathy is the door to putting yourself in someone else's shoes. What's going on? is it? I feel like I'm dancing around, but there's like a point and I just keep missing it. I'm going, what is it? What is it? It's there somewhere. I know it is. Because once I can figure out and I define precisely what's going on when we are objective. Okay, I'm going to go back to the boy in Stranger Things. He was being tortured and I didn't feel it. It was no longer my story. It was no longer my story. I changed my story. It was no longer my story. It was defined knowledge that allowed me to stay objective. But what knowledge? There was something that I figured out that I went, aha. It was this defined knowledge that allowed me to stay objective. Grounding. Definitely grounding is part of this. Definitely a defined self. Oh, I'm just like walking around this over and over again. And I'm like, oh, come on. If I can find the right words, the right perspective, that I can just say ABC. And people go, oh, I'm no longer internalizing or projecting. Done. And projecting is a consequence of internalization. Everyone internalizes. When you internalize or project, it's the same thing. It's just some people internalize and then they do X. Some people internalize and then they do Y. The people who do Y project. So some people internalize and self-attack. Other people internalize and attack. You could say explode. Whereas some people internalize and they implode. And projection is when they internalize and explode. So it's not either you internalize or you project. That's not an either or situation. It is an evolutional experience. So either you internalize, like internalize is stage A, and then you implode, which is B. You self-attack. And then you can internalize, which is A, and then you can attack, which is option C. And that is projection. But we are not calling this self-attack by any name because it's invisible, because we don't physically see it, because we're not experiencing it. So this B, this internalize and then self-attack, that's not being seen, not at all. Whereas when we project, people aren't seeing the internalization. People internalize and it's invisible. People project, and when you internalize and self-attack, we see things like, oh my God, what have I done? Whereas when they project, it's, oh my God, how could you make me do that? And it's, what is going on with internalization? And I've said this before, where it's definitely the internalization of another person's story. What are we not doing that keeps us in check? And that's it right there, is there's a self-check That is not happening. It's like there's definitely an imbalance of X. Accountability, responsibility. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to. It is the imbalance of responsibility. But what causes it? Oh my God, it's driving me nuts. All right, I'm going to get off of this because it's not there yet. And it's just, I need to sit down and write a logical proof. So yeah, when you empathize and you see something and then you feel the emotions of another person, what you are actually experiencing is an emotional trigger that is literally awakening your emotional memory. And you watching them suffer reminds you of a time when you suffered. And it's an internalization. It really is an internalization of their suffering, which is why this is so closely linked to an internalization. And it's going to bother me until I figure this out. But the problem is, because we are so focused on this internalization of emotional memory, we are not paying attention to our own compassionate foresight. And the big key between both of these is compassionate foresight is void of an emotional flooding, basically. There's no emotional flooding. So when people are like, oh, I'm over feeling all the emotions, I can feel all the emotions, I need to be isolated. No, your internalization is out of check. You are over internalizing everything too much. And the question is, why are we over internalizing? And I'm back to the thing I'm trying to get off of right now, which is, and that's it, is there is something there that's causing us to over internalize. There is a mental process that's occurring when we over internalize. And my intuition right now is screaming, look at the cognitive core, Anna, look at the cognitive core. So I'm looking at the cognitive core. All right, so you have your identity and you have your ethics and you have your beliefs. Empathy. I remember when I suffered. It's definitely PTSD. Internalize. Go to the word. Why was the word invented? God, this is driving me crazy. It's like we have dimension confusion. That's exactly what it feels like, is we have dimension confusion. We are suffering from dimension confusion with identity displacement. It would be a logic loop. It would be a logic loop. So that we see the suffering at A, which is the catalyst. And then B, we internalize it. We place ourselves into their story. Law of reflection. It's almost as if there's a surplus of empathy, but it's out of order. I cannot figure this out. I can figure it out. I'm just not seeing it. I'm missing one major key element and I just cannot figure it out. I'm walking through dimensions and abstract identity displacement and empathy, the law of reflection, so that when we see someone suffering, it mirrors it. And when it mirrors it, we absorb it. And we have our mimic, mirror, repetition response. Oh, I hate my OCD. Right now, this is a time where I hate it because I'm obsessing and it's like, oh, I hate it when I have riddles. When I have riddles and I can't get off of my riddles. All right, let's try to manage my OCD right now. Maybe that's what I need to do because, yeah, and I'm definitely tired also. So I'm really going to try and set aside this right now because I'm definitely in one of my OCD lines and it's gone. It's like, and I just want to go down this line, but I definitely don't have the mental constitution. So I'm going to tell you the story about my cat and his spring. He has a spring and he carries it around with him like a dog. He plays fetch. I have one of those cats that plays fetch. It's weird. And I cannot tell you how many times we have stepped on the spring, and it is one of the most fuckiest things I've ever felt in my life, is stepping on this cat spring. And he's playing it with it right now. He found it last night. And he's got, I've never seen a cat with a toy obsession like this one. This cat has got collections of toys, and he's got all of them. Usually, and cats are extraordinary with this because you'll buy them toys, and they might have one toy that they kind of play with, and others where they'll kind of, they'll ignore it, or they'll just find random garbage to play with, like the little twisty ties off of the bread or off of the milk. This cat loves all of his toys. He's got his sloth, which is his favorite. And then he's got this spring, and he's got this weird, and then we got squeak balls. They're yellow balls, and they squeak. It's a dog toy. And this cat it'll be in the middle of the night, and we'll hear squeak. It's really fucking bizarre. But this blue spring, and he's playing with it right now. He carries it all over the place. And every time you step on it, your brain can't process it. The emotion surprise is an inability to process data. That is what surprise is. It is the inability to process data. I love the emotion surprise. The emotion surprise is hilarious. And because you have this inability to process data, it's like a glitch in processing. That is what surprise is. It is a glitch in processing. And then humor is when, I don't know what humor is. I'm still trying to figure that out. Part of humor is the irony, the dichotomy. It is the dichotomy of having reaction A to reaction X when it was ridiculous. So, and that's it right there, is you have humor when there is dichotomy between the point of surprise that then turns into something that's ridiculous. It's the ridiculousness of the dichotomy. So you have this, it's the element of surprise. I love surprise. And it's just a glitch in our ability to process. So our processing says, oh my God, it's danger, when in fact it's a spring. And then that dichotomy, that contrast, is what causes humor in some cases. I also located in some other instances of humor that it's taught, it's conditioned. And for instance, it's everybody is laughing, therefore you laugh. And that is learned humor. That is a different kind of humor. That's actually not humor. That is a defense. So there's humor as a defense. And a lot of people don't realize that humor is a defense. And this is basically there's going to be problems if you don't act happy. And that's your indulgence avoidance that we see from people who basically, it's that emotional trigger. You have somebody with PTSD where they see an emotional response like crying. And so the crying triggers their PTSD, and then they yell, causing PTSD associated with crying. And that links, I'm going to laugh when I want to cry to keep myself safe and avoid the yelling. And now you've got an entire people who laugh when they're upset or frightened. And then you've got other people who use laughing as a cue to say, oh, they like it. No, they don't like it. It's a trauma response. It's a fear response. And that's where you get some people, who very much associate laughter with consent without realizing that laughter is also a trauma response. And then B, and that's called fawning, by the way. Fawning is when somebody is conditioned to be happy to avoid the trauma of yelling. And that's the PTSD arc of you have the emotional trauma response like crying. And that leads into the fawning response, the trained fawn response of laughing to pretend that everything is okay to keep you safe. And then that leads to people laughing when they're uncomfortable and being raped. True story. And then you've got people who are doing the non-consensual act thinking that laughter is consent. And that's where the disconnect is coming from. Laughter is not consent. And then they're going, well, they must like it because no, that's not how human psychology works. You are avoiding the fact that people laugh out of trauma all the time because they were conditioned to. So it's really this unspoken layout of how PTSD goes on to teach fawning in other people, which goes on to give root to a lot of non-consensual behavior from other people. I remember this one time I was on the subway and this girl, she had this, where these boys were harassing her sexually and she was laughing, even though she was clearly uncomfortable. She kept telling them no and she laughed. And that was because she was PTSD exposed to yelling and screaming, and that conditioned her to fawn. And then in turn, she would laugh and pretend everything was fine, even though things were absolutely not fine. So she would say, please don't do X. And they ignored her words and they prioritized. And this is really it, is she had words, she had behavior, and then she had her laughing. Her behavior said no, her words said no, but she laughed. And because they took the laughing, they went, okay, there you go, there's the consent. No, that's not how it works. So that's a lot of what's going on with the fawning and how that links over. That is, again, what happens with emotional triggers with PTSD. I'm trying to cope with my OCD right now. And it's like, what is it? What is it? What is it? And I'm really trying to distract myself from it. And it's, I'm going to get off of this video and that's all I'm going to do is I'm going to go onto my Zoom and I'm just going to like go through it. And I think that's what I'm experiencing is I feel pressure. I'm putting pressure on myself because I'm live and I'm like, why are you doing that, I'll just do it. All right, I'm going to have a conversation with my subconscious mind. All right, subconscious mind. I'm tired. That's part of what's the problem. I did not sleep well, apparently. I'm tired. I can feel myself being tired. Okay. So because I'm tired, I'm at lower functioning of my perspective, which means I'm too tired to think. All right. So I'm just too tired to make the connection of what I'm missing that's so blatantly fucking obvious with objectivity. And it's driving me crazy. But I want the answer. I have to write a logical proof, it says. So I have to write a logical proof. My cognitive functioning is low today. That is what my problem is. My cognitive functioning is low today. Damn it. I had a really big 2 days. And then I was doing graphs. I hate doing graphs. I'm writing my book, Theory of Love, right now. And I'm writing out the diagrams. And the diagrams are tedious and I fucking hate doing them. There's no joy. So it drains me because there's no joy. And now I'm just sitting here like, all right, I did a lot of cognitive shit over the last 3 days. And then I did, in addition to doing the cognitive stuff, I also did these diagrams. And I'm currently embedding the diagrams into my book, Theory of Love. But I have these, I'm going over the 12 ethical perspectives. in my book, and there's breaking down each and every perspective with, look, this is the full summary. Like there's the summary of each perspective, which goes through how each perspective leads to each and every mental illness, specifically how the first perspective leads to mental illnesses A, B, C. And then the second perspective leads to mental illnesses D, E, F. And then the third perspective leads to X, Y, Z. And that's it. The fourth perspective leads to like one mental illness, and that's it. But it corrects itself when you correct the first, second, and third perspective. And then once you correct those three, the fourth immediately corrects itself and you're fine. There is no other mental illnesses that develop after the fourth and fifth perspective, after the fifth perspective. So I have the summary, but then there's also the learning center of the 12 ethical perspectives. And it's basically a relationship between how we indulge, which switches over to our avoidant, which then switches over to our integration. That's our learning center, is indulge, avoid, and integration. That's how we learn. And we have something called the pendulum paradigm. The pendulum paradigm is what happens specifically during parenting when a PTSD forces us to non-consensually indulge. And then, because not for indulgence, but for trauma, we avoid. And we're supposed to avoid due to indulgence. That teaches us. And it's exactly like, and the example I'm going to use is a child indulges on eating candy. And then when they indulge, they get sick of the candy, sick of, tired of, boredom. And then that switches their learning center over to avoidance. So then they're going to indulge on the health food while avoiding the candy. And then they gorge themselves so much on the health food that they get sick of that. And then they swing into an integration stage. And the integration is where they learn moderation and balance. But while you are learning moderation and balance, you are also avoiding something else, something new, because you are trying to make way for integration and moderation. And that avoidance causes us to indulge again, which causes us to avoid. So we end up swinging back and forth between indulge, avoid, moderate, integrate, indulge, and void, indulge, avoid. And this is how we learn, but you require gluttony to do it. And if you avoid gluttony, it's like trying to learn how to integrate without learning the value. To avoid gluttony is to try and learn moderation without value. And you can't do it because then you'll have no value. When this occurs, you experience scarcity and abundance. When you indulge, you experience the abundance of one thing and the scarcity of another. This is how we get stuck. And when you have non-consensual indulgence, you also experience non-consensual deficit. Substitute. So as you are in the non-consensual abundance, indulgence, You associate trauma now. Trauma is linked to the non-consent part. All trauma is non-consent. Because every time you don't consent, you are compromising your self-authority. There's a whole lot of views all over that on purpose. It's because self-authority lies with the self. And when we have non-consent, it is us choosing to prioritize and value the feelings of another person. And as a result, we fail to preserve our own authority. And we give up the power through agreement of value. It is our value of something or our priority of something that gives it power. And we choose the value. We choose the priority. Always. Very, very, very few of us literally experience non-consent with a preservation of self-authority. Very few of us. People who experience that are people who are drafted into war, people who are literally imprisoned. Not psychologically imprisoned, physically imprisoned, like gun to the head type of imprisonment. That is actually non-consent with the self-authority being preserved, because then you get the prisoner who fights back. The fighting back is the preservation of the self-authority. As soon as you consent, even if you consent to self-preserve, yeah, this is where things get real sticky. To consent for the state of self-preservation, you are still sacrificing your self-authority. If you're doing so consciously, well, then you've kept your self-authority, but you have to do it consciously. If you do it unconsciously, subconsciously, now you're switching it around. If you allow fear to dictate your choices, you are sacrificing self-authority because you value prioritize something else. In most cases, we value prioritize our belonging. Survival is on the line. And this is really what this all comes down to, is our survival versus our desire. And that's really the internal battle, is what you desire and what you are trying to survive. Now you've got non-consent. So when you have that, that is what's being compromised in a state of trauma. So now you have trauma associated with trauma by association, whatever it is you're being forced to indulge in, non-consensual indulgence, non-consensual deficit. And then you switch over to a scarcity mindset. So you switch over to your scarcity mindset, and that's where you see hoarding, is because they are trying to substitute for what they lack. This is also where you see emotional prosthetics, because they believe that they cannot have what they want. So they use emotional prosthetics to get what they want. And as a result, you see substitution happen a lot. So the real question is, what do you want? That's really the ultimate question, is what do you want? And a lot of people believe they can't have what they want. So they substitute it via an emotional prosthetic. And then they end up hoarding it because it's not actually filling them up, because it's not what they want. It's a shitty substitute. And that's where you see hoarding come in, is a shitty substitute for what they really want. But now you are completely stuck in the avoidance. And you are so averse to the thing X that you are avoiding that you never learn integration. And so you get stuck in the paradigm of abundance, indulgence, over to scarcity, avoidance, indulgence on the thing you once avoided, to moderation. You can't learn moderation now because you're stuck in hoarding. And it is the abundance, indulgence, and then the avoidance and abundance of what you once avoided that allows us to switch perspectives. When you fail to switch perspectives, you're no longer growing. You're stuck. So trauma stunts growth, which we know this. And trauma also shrinks our hippocampus. This is all about our hippocampus. Hippocampus is all at the center of this. So trauma stunts our growth, but our ability to be open-minded to receive the fluidity of indulgence into acceptance, and then moderation allows the growth as we switch from perspective to perspective. And every one of these is a different perspective. So this would be perspective A, perspective 1, your first perspective, where you need to indulge on comfort. And then when you get bored of comfort, you go to adventure. This is when you learn. This is the learning perspective. And this follows through with you for the rest of your life. It's comfort and adventure, learning, comfort and learning. And if we don't know how to regulate, which is what we learn on the third ethic, self-regulation, now we're not learning how to balance. We're not learning moderation. This is why the first 3 ethics determine our trauma. Is because if you have an overindulgence in comfort initially, you're not going to be able to learn and accept learning and adventure. If you are traumatized over in the learning and the adventure, why can't we be objective? Yeah, this is all about me still. This whole thing is still me going, why? Because this is something to do with being objective. You know what objective is? It's vulnerability, which is an oxymoron, but it's true, and I will show you why here in a minute. It is. There it is. Found it. I found. Okay, it's secure vulnerability. It's vulnerability. Oh, that's right. It's right. And now I'm putting together the logical proof because I can feel it. It's right. It's definitely vulnerability. Being objective is the state of being open to receive. That is what vulnerability means. Open to receive. You're open to receive ideas. You're open to receive concepts. And when you're open to receive, you're objective because you're open to receive. You are a student. So you've taken an objective role by being vulnerable so you can receive it. It's not weak. It's open to receive. Being objective is open to receive. Now, you can't experience true vulnerability without confidence, trust, self-regulation. And when you feel the vulnerability start to shake, when you feel the confidence, the trust, and the self-regulation, you've been pushed to your limit and you go back to your comfort zone. That's when you swing back to the first perspective, your comfort. And the reason why you are in your comfort is because you're no longer open to receive. You are it's close. Oh my God, it's so close. Self-doubt. Undefined. You seek definition. There it is. You're seeking definition. That's why you're in the comfort zone. The comfort zone is your genie bottle. It's where you're supposed to go home and ground yourself so you know who you are. And then once you know who you are and you trust yourself to regulate, you go into the adventure zone where you open up and you're vulnerable and you receive information, you receive story, you receive other people's perspectives. But then you get to a point where you're out there too long, too far, and you start to feel the influence. You start to feel them influence you. And then you feel it change you without consent. You can no longer be objective. So you go back to the comfort zone to remind yourself who you are, because the law of reflection. You see, when you're vulnerable, the law of reflection doesn't work. When you're truly vulnerable, the law of reflection doesn't work. I see this with my partner, where when I'm with him, because he's my partner and he mirrors me and I've chosen him as my U of I, when I am with him, I know who I am because I can see me in him and it reflects that. I'm Leah. I know who I am now. I remember. All right. That is an invasive perspective. And then I'm fine again. And then I can venture out and I know who I am. It's defined so that when other people tell me their perspective, I can say, yeah, I can observe it without what is this? Observe it without absorbing it. I can observe it without absorbing it. It's like I'm shopping. It's like somebody tells me their perspective and I'm shopping for what information is going to go into my system. You can observe it without absorbing it into your logical line. Really fucking important. And as soon as I feel that faltering, I can feel it going, oh, I'm starting to absorb it. I need to go back to my comfort zone. So I go back to my comfort zone. And when I'm in my comfort zone, I immediately consult with my U of I. And I go, oh yeah, I know who I am. I remember who I am. I need to reinforce myself. And then once I'm secure and I trust me again and I'm solid, then I can go back into the world of adventuring and be vulnerable to receive, open to receive. But as soon as I feel that absorption again, I'm done. The problem is internalizing is when you overabsorb. Internalizing is when you overabsorb. It's not in check. You are not keeping your observation and your absorption in check. It's your law of reflection. It is the regulation of your law of reflection. Boom! It is the regulation of your law of reflection. I knew it was there. You can choose what you put that law of reflection on. You can choose it. But my fucking God, do you have to be self-aware? Because if you're not, you're going to absorb everything. Your law of reflection. You're going to reflect. This is an optic physics. The answer is an optic physics. Deflect, deflect, deflect. It's when you deflect. Ah, there it is. There it is. It's when you're vulnerable, you deflect. When you are vulnerable, you deflect. It's the law of deflection. Being objective is when you deflect. There it is. There it is. It's when you deflect information. So you can look at it without taking it into you. But as soon as you feel it affecting you, that's when you need to be using your boundaries to go, oh, I need to go back to my comfort zone. And you retreat. Some dipshit somewhere said that the fear system or the fear response is flight. And that's fucking wrong. That's your defense system, not your fear system. Your boundary is your defense. And that is your ability to flee, to get your ass back to your comfort zone. Sometimes you have to fight first. These are not fear responses. Bad psychology. Those are not fear responses. Those are your defense system, your anger responses. That is your self-preservation response, not fear. Those are your logical self-preservation responses. Your fear system will fall on the ground and laugh and fawn. Fawn and flop is fear. Your fear system is survival. And your fawn and your flop response. That's when you have your vagal nerve response kick in. That is fear. But your self-preservation is not fear. Your self-preservation works with your identity and your logic to problem solve. Fleeing and fighting is problem solving, effective problem solving. It's fucking using your boundaries. It is not fear. You never run away when you're afraid. You pass out, you flop, you fawn, you chameleon yourself. You sabotage yourself. It is the loss and lack of self-preservation. It's too late. By the time your fear system is functioning, self-preservation has long since sailed. And now you're just trying to survive. Survival is not self-preservation. Self-preservation is gone. You are now absorbing your abuser when you fawn or flop. Specifically when you fawn, because now you have conditioning. That's where fear is. That's not self-preservation. Oh my God, that's not self-preservation. I am on my website. I have a whole thing where I break down self-preservation and how self-preservation is very different from fear and all the logistics as to why. Self-preservation and fear are not the same thing. They are actually, and here's the deciding factor. You cannot have fear and love at the same time. You cannot have logic and fear at the same time. Self-love, love and logic actually destroy fear. They cannot coexist. Self-preservation can. Self-preservation can coexist with love and logic. Self-preservation, love, and logic is this gorgeous little thing happening here. Oh my God, are they gorgeous? They are like this beautiful team. And that is your defense system. That's your boundaries. Fear literally destroys all of that. Hijacks self-preservation and then throws it out the window and then does its own goddamn thing. Fear is too late. So fleeing and fighting, I am struggling. When I am in lower functioning, when my cognitive core is shut down, I stutter. That's when my stuttering comes back. The boundaries. It's absolutely the fearing and the fighting and the fleeing. That's absolutely part of it. So it's the law of it's when you overabsorb. So internalizing is when you overabsorb because your law of the law, that's why law of physics, optic physics specifically. So let me go back over to optic physics. Now there are 4 laws with optic physics. There's reflection, deflection. Let me go optic physics. Optics. Boom. Optics. All right. So we have 4 laws. What are the laws? All right, geometrical optics. Oh, what gorgeous words these are. Oh, thank you, Lizzie. Reflection. Okay, so you have reflection, which is your mirroring response. That's how we learn. Oh, it's regulating your learning center. It's regulating learning. Oh, that's it. It's regulating learning. I love it when I find the right words. So you have the law of reflection. Refraction. You have the law of refraction. I really want to say that the law of refraction is fawning and chameleon response. It is invasive perspective. In fact, imagine a line. This is your logic line. Trauma occurs and it creates an alternate perspective. It literally diverts your logic away. So it's actually the law of refraction is your invasive perspective. Trauma is when the law of refraction occurs. Reflection is when you have that mirror response on how we learn. That is proper learning. And then deflection I'll have Earl Grey. Hot. Thank you. What, hun? Oh, they're the same thing, sweetheart. They changed their branding. Polarization. Oh, this just opened up a whole lot for me. All right. Lasers. All right, I got to calm down. Every time I see lasers, I'm lasers. Sharks with lasers. Okay, so refraction, reflection, where I'm not finding it. It's yeah, I am definitely. Yeah, my cognition is so low today. It's wonderful. This is what science on the brain. Interference, diffraction, polarization. I can't find it. It is deflection, I want to say. It is the law of deflection. And the law of deflection. All right, so the law of deflection. Law of deflection. And I want to say that the law of deflection. Oh God, I cannot think. I just can't think today. But the law of deflection is what happens when. The law of deflection is what happens when we internalize or we fail to internalize. When we are objective. So being objective is when we practice the law of deflection. And when we fail to use the law of deflection, we switch over to the law of reflection. And we start to over-absorb things that we should not absorb. And when we over-absorb those that we should not, that is when we internalize. And because there's the link right there, it is. Because we are now under attack. This is what I was trying to get to. It is our perspective. It is our internal logic that is now under attack because we are absorbing, we are reflecting into our internal self, so that it is our internal logic that is now under attack. That's what's happening with internalization. And then we project to attack, or we implode and we self-attack. And what happens under self-attack is when we destroy our own internal logic. Yeah, that is when we have civil divide. Whereas with projection, it is a fight response, an attempt to preserve our internal logic. That's what's going on. That was really hard to get to. But when you're objective, you are practicing the law of deflection. Now, here's the rule. When you get to the point where your objectivity is starting to slide, that is when you need boundaries and you need to get back to your comfort zone. I knew they were linked and it was driving me crazy. So the boundaries happen, or you're supposed to do boundaries and get back to your comfort zone. You're in the adventuring zone, so you're learning. So this is all about learning how to use your deflection with your law. I am sick. That's what this is. Oh, I am sick. I know I am. You have your law of deflection, and you basically build that up in your comfort zone so you can then go out and deflect. But as it wears down, your law of deflection wears down. And when your law of deflection wears down, after a while, you start to absorb what's on the outside. As you absorb what's on the outside, it flips it. And you start to take in and you overabsorb. So bottom line, this is in summary, in conclusion. Internalization happens when we fail to use our comfort zone effectively with our boundaries. That's it. It is the integration. It is the integrated use of our comfort zone and our boundaries. Failing to use those two things in collaboration is going to cause internalization, which is the first sign that you should have gotten your ass to your comfort zone a long time ago, and you didn't. So you're internalizing. That is what's wrong. When you are in your comfort zone and you are learning properly, you should be using joy and love, trust, yep, and faith and hope to solidify and rebuild up your ability to practice your law of deflection so you can go back out there. When you go back out there, you're in your adventure zone. You've got your law of deflection up so that you deflect anything that comes near you. You're objective now. However, as that wears down and you start to absorb, your law of reflection is starting to kick in again, because that's how we learn. You only have X amount of exposure to the elements before you start to lose your law of deflection and you start to go back to the law of reflection. It's your exposure. That's what it is. You are experiencing overexposure, which is a thing in physics. It's overexposure. So you are overexposed to basically mirrors, people. And as a result, you are basically not exercising proper socialization, right? You're not regulating your social skills. That's what this is. So as a result, and here's the other thing, is it takes practice. So people will then go the avoidance and they will go, I'm going to never come out of my comfort zone. And now I'm an introvert. No, well, no, you're not. You need to learn how to regulate. There, I knew this was in here somewhere. I feel better now. I am sick. I am very, very sick. I can feel it. Very, very sick. No, I'm not very, very sick. I definitely have a cold, and that's why I felt it yesterday. And I'm definitely in like the flu realm where I just want to go to sleep and I just want to shut down. And I can feel it. My body is dragging today. So I am, I am definitely, I'm sick. So I'm going to go take care of myself. But I'm glad I got over this. So we're going to break this down further. I'm actually going to clean this up over on my Blackboard, and then I'm going to do a whole article on this. My health permitting, because now it's screaming at me going, you need a mental health day. So I was like, okay, I need a mental health day. I need a physical day, because apparently I'm taking a sick day today. This has been in my brain for a long time, and it's driving me fucking crazy. I'm like, I gotta figure this out. So yeah, I had to go over into the laws of physics, and it was, so our laws of the optic physics is what regulates our learning centers. They are fucking parallel. Laws of physics and learning is they are two peas in a pod. They are the same thing. The laws of optic physics is what regulates and determines our learning skills. And when we do not regulate them properly, internalization happens. All right, so there's that OCD now solved, so I can go to sleep now because I feel peace. So thank you so much for your audience today. And may the kindest of words always find you.